I sat pressed back into the driver's seat, trying not even to breathe. The cold seeped through my jacket, yet a line of icy sweat ran down my spine. Outside, barely 4 inches from my face, on the other side of the thin cab window, someone was standing there. I couldn't see his face. The glass had completely frozen over from the inside, covered in intricate frost patterns. But I could hear him. I could hear the heavy, rasping breath. And the sound of a fingernail slowly scraping down the glass with a sickening squeal. From top to bottom. Again and again. I knew the doors were locked. I knew there was a crowbar under my seat. But I also knew we were 50 kilometers from the nearest building, on a closed winter highway where the temperature had dropped to -40. No person could be standing out there. Not dressed the way I had glimpsed in the headlights a minute earlier. The door handle jerked. First weakly, then with sudden fury. The entire cab rocked. These are 3 true terrifying stories about night hauls. I've been a long-haul truck driver for 12 years. I've seen accidents, drunk drivers, strange lights in the sky over Nevada that always turned out to have logical explanations. But what happened to me in the fall of 2019 on Interstate 80, somewhere between Wyoming and Utah, has no explanation at all. The route was routine. I was hauling a load of electronics to Salt Lake City. I like night shifts. Less traffic, no one cutting you off, just you, the rumble of the engine, and the endless strip of asphalt carved out of darkness by your headlights. It's almost meditative. You fall into the rhythm, and the miles simply disappear. It was around 3 in the morning. The deadest hour of the night. The radio was silent except for static. I glanced into the rearview mirror. Nothing. The darkness behind me was so dense it felt as if the world beyond my rear bumper had simply ceased to exist. And then I saw them. Headlights. They appeared out of nowhere. 1 second the horizon behind me was empty, and the next there were 2 dull yellow eyes glowing about 100 meters back. Old halogen lights, the kind trucks had in the 80s. I didn't think much of it. Someone was driving faster than me and had caught up. I was cruising at a steady 105 kilometers per hour. I expected him to pass. The road was empty. No oncoming traffic. But he didn't pass. He closed the distance to about 30 meters and stayed there. It's irritating when someone rides your tail like that, shining straight into your mirrors, but it's part of the job. I eased off the gas slightly, inviting him to overtake me. He slowed down too. I sped up. He sped up. I frowned. The distance between our bumpers remained perfectly constant, as if we were connected by a rigid tow bar. 20 minutes passed. The monotony began to turn into irritation, and irritation slowly into unease. I couldn't make out the truck itself. Its headlights were angled too high and blinded me through the mirrors, creating a halo of light that hid the cab behind it. Then the first strange thing happened. My CB radio, which had been silent for the past 3 hours, suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, a voice forced its way through. Not a normal voice, more like a twisted collage of sounds, as if someone had scrambled an audio recording. "See you, blue cab, alone." I grabbed the microphone. "Hey, buddy behind me. Either pass or back off. You're blinding me." Silence. Only the hiss of static. Then the same voice returned. This time it sounded slightly clearer, but the tone was completely flat, devoid of emotion. "Distance, maintain, see you." A chill ran across my skin. It didn't sound like a conversation. It sounded like someone had cut words out of different radio transmissions and stitched them together. I decided to test a theory. There was a long uphill stretch ahead. I pushed the pedal to the floor. My rig is a new Peterbilt, it pulls beautifully. I started pulling away. The headlights in the mirror shrank. I exhaled. Probably just some lunatic or a tired driver stuck on cruise control. I crested the hill and started down the other side. The road curved sharply to the right into a blind bend. I followed the arc, and when the road straightened again, I glanced into the mirror. My heart skipped a beat. The truck was still there. But now it wasn't 30 meters behind me. It was 5. An enormous rust-eaten grill filled the entire rear-view mirror. I hadn't even heard it close the distance. At that range I should have heard the roar of its engine drowning out my own. But all I heard were tires on asphalt. Was its engine off? Or was it running silently? At that moment I could finally see the cab. It was an old Mack, maybe from the 70s. The paint was peeling, the metal a dark gray, almost black. The cab windows were completely tinted. No license numbers on the bumper. And the worst part? It had no trailer. Just a tractor unit. A massive, heavy tractor unit hurtling downhill less than a meter from my bumper. I pressed the accelerator, trying to pull away, but the speedometer needle was already past 120. I couldn't push the truck any harder on that stretch without risking a rollover. The radio clicked. "Don't leave." This time the voice had changed. It was my voice. A recording of what I had said 5 minutes earlier, either pass or back off. But it was distorted, slowed down, turned into a low, dragging drone. Panic slammed into me. This wasn't some road game. This was a hunt. Up ahead I saw a sign. Rest area, 2 miles. My chance. There could be other truckers there. Light. People. I flipped on my turn signal sharply. The truck behind me copied the movement. At the exact same second, I flew down the exit ramp at a dangerous speed. My tires screamed. The rest area was almost empty, 2 semi-trucks sleeping in the far corner and 1 car parked near the restrooms. I blasted past them and slammed on the brakes beneath the only working street lamp, hoping the light would scare the pursuer off. I grabbed the crowbar and jumped out of the cab, ready to fight. My adrenaline was through the roof. I spun around, expecting to see the rusted Mack roaring onto the lot behind me. But the road was empty. I stood there under the buzzing lamp, gripping the piece of iron, staring at the entrance. Silence. No engine noise. No headlights. Just the wind pushing dust across the asphalt. It couldn't have driven past. I would have seen its lights on the highway, which was visible for nearly a kilometer. It couldn't have taken another exit, there were none. It had simply vanished. I stood outside for 10 minutes, shivering from the cold and the fading adrenaline. Maybe I imagined it. Fatigue. Highway hypnosis. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and pulled the curtains shut. Of course I couldn't sleep. I sat with the lights on, drinking lukewarm coffee and listening to every tiny sound. An hour later, when dawn began painting the sky gray, I decided to step outside and inspect the truck before leaving. Check the tires, the straps. A routine that usually calms your nerves. I walked around the tractor. Everything looked normal. Then I reached the back of the trailer. And froze. The entire rear door of my white trailer was covered in black soot. As if someone had held an exhaust pipe against the metal for hours. But in the center of the soot, someone had written words with a finger. The letters were huge and crooked. "We are almost there." I don't know when it was written. I hadn't stopped for 6 hours before that moment. Which meant one of 2 things. Either the message appeared while I was driving 100 kilometers an hour. Or they were here, at this rest stop, while I sat inside the cab. And I never noticed them. I never drove Interstate 80 alone at night again. The second story happened a year later. At that time I was working on contract up north, hauling timber and equipment for drilling rigs. The money is different there, and so are the risks. The roads there are roads in name only. Gravel, mud, narrow clearings cutting through century-old forests where the trees close above your head, forming a tunnel. The job was strange from the very beginning. The dispatcher gave me the coordinates of a loading point that didn't exist on any map. An old sawmill, he said. The guys work unofficially, so don't ask too many questions. They pay triple rate in cash. Greed is a bad advisor. I agreed. I reached the turnoff to the forest road around 7 in the evening. The sun was already setting, the shadows stretching longer, turning the forest into a black wall. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for the wheels. Branches whipped against the mirrors and the roof of the cab. The navigator lost signal after 10 minutes. I continued by the odometer. I had to drive 12 miles into the forest. At the 5th mile I noticed something that made me tense. On the side of the road, half hidden by ferns, there was a car. A passenger car, an old sedan. It looked abandoned, flat tires, broken windows, the body covered in moss. Half a mile later, another one. A pickup truck lying on its side. It looked like a cemetery of vehicles. But why here? It's impossible to end up here by accident. I tried calling the dispatcher, but there was no signal. I decided I would reach the location, turn around, and leave if anything at all felt wrong. Turning around earlier on such a narrow road was impossible. At the 9th mile the road ended at a fallen tree. A massive spruce blocked the path. A fresh cut. The tree hadn't fallen on its own. Someone had cut it down recently. I stopped the truck. An unnatural silence hung in the forest. No birds. No wind. Only the low rumble of my diesel engine idling. I had to get out to assess the situation. Maybe I could drag the trunk aside with chains. I opened the door and stepped onto the damp ground. The smell of pine was thick, but mixed with something else. A sweet, cloying odor. Like rotting meat. I walked closer to the fallen tree. That's when I noticed it. On the trunk, on the side facing me, photographs had been nailed to the wood. Dozens of Polaroid pictures. I shined my flashlight on them. The photos showed trucks. Different ones. Blue, red, white. Taken from behind bushes, from the roadside, from trees. And in every photo you could see the driver behind the wheel. Completely unaware. On the last photograph was my truck. The picture had been taken from behind as I turned onto this dirt road half an hour earlier. It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. This was a trap. The tree had been cut down to block me. The one who took the photo, did he pass me through the forest somehow? Or were there several of them? I ran back toward the cab. At that moment a branch snapped in the forest to my left. Loudly. Deliberately. I aimed the flashlight beam into the trees. Between the trunks, about 20 meters away, people were standing there. 5 or 6 of them. They were just standing and watching. They wore dirty camouflage. Their faces were hidden by cloths or masks. 2 of them were holding something long, bats or rifles. I didn't look closely. They didn't run. They simply watched as I scrambled back into the cab in panic. I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even find the ignition slot, even though the engine was already running. I needed to reverse. 12 miles backward along a winding forest road. In the dark. I shifted into reverse. The rear camera turned on, lighting the cab with a pale glow. On the screen I saw that behind me, blocking my retreat, another tree had fallen. While I was looking at the photographs, they had cut down another spruce behind my truck. I was in a cage. Panic turned into cold, animal terror. I looked through the side window. The figures stepped out of the forest and slowly approached the truck. They walked calmly, knowing I had nowhere to go. I did the only thing I could. I slammed the gas pedal down and aimed the 40-ton truck straight at the tree in front of me. The bumper hit the trunk. The impact was brutal. I was thrown into the steering wheel, and the plastic on the dashboard cracked. The truck roared, the wheels biting into the mud, spinning. The tree creaked and shifted a meter, but held. The people outside were already at the doors. One of them swung something heavy and smashed it against the side window. The glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. I dropped the truck into low gear and locked the differential. "Come on, baby, come on," I shouted. The truck lunged forward. The front wheels climbed over the trunk. The cab tipped sharply downward, then upward. I heard metal grinding against wood, fuel tanks, axles, everything scraping along the trunk. The trailer jerked violently, leaning as if it would flip, but the weight of the cargo held it down. We made it over. I didn't look back. I tore down the forest road, destroying the suspension, ignoring every hole and bump. Behind me I heard gunshots, dry cracks like snapping branches. One bullet hit the back wall of the sleeper cabin. I burst onto the highway 20 minutes later with a blown tire and a torn-off muffler. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest police station, 100 miles away. The police listened to me skeptically. But when they saw the footage from my dashcam, fortunately it had been recording, their expressions changed. They organized a raid 2 days later. Later they told me what they had found there. A camp. Belongings of dozens of truck drivers who had been listed as missing for years. But they didn't find the people. The forest was empty. Only on the tree I had driven over there was a note, nailed to the trunk sometime after my escape. It read, "You drive better than the others. We remember." The third story brings us back to where I began. To the cold. It happened last winter in northern Canada, on the Dempster Highway. It's a road that leads to the Arctic Ocean. In winter it's nothing more than packed snow and ice over gravel. There's no signal out there. No police. If your truck breaks down, you rely only on yourself, and on the luck that someone might pass by. But that day there was a storm. The forecast had warned about a blizzard, but I thought I could make it over the pass before the real hell started. I was wrong. Visibility dropped to 0 within minutes. Snow was flying horizontally. I was driving almost by touch, navigating by the roadside marker poles. And then the engine died. It just stopped. The electronics went dark, the power steering shut off. I coasted to the side of the road and came to a halt. The silence came instantly. The wind howled outside, but inside the cab, while it still held some warmth, it was quiet. I tried to start the engine again. The starter clicked, but the engine wouldn't catch. Frozen fuel? Electrical failure? It didn't matter. What mattered was that the temperature outside was minus 45 degrees Celsius. The cab would lose its heat within half an hour. I would freeze to death in a couple of hours unless I burned the camping stove and wrapped myself in every blanket I had. I took out my satellite phone. No signal. Of course. The storm was strong enough to interfere with the satellites. I crawled into my sleeping bag, lit the gas stove for warmth, leaving a small crack in the window for ventilation, and prepared to wait. Hours passed. The darkness outside was absolute. Snow was piling up around the cab. Around midnight I heard a sound. Through the screaming wind came a rhythmic knock. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up. The sound was coming from the back wall of the cab. As if someone was tapping a finger against the metal. Metal cooling, contracting, I told myself. Knock, knock, knock. Now the sound came from the side. From the passenger door. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the window. All I saw was the white curtain of snow stuck to the glass. Nothing else. Then I saw a shadow. Something blocked the whiteness outside for a moment. Something large moved past the passenger door toward the hood. A bear? Wolves? Animals don't roam in storms like this. They hide. I froze, gripping my tire iron. The shadow returned to the driver's door. And then the thing I mentioned at the beginning happened. A knock on the glass. Not claws. Knuckles. A polite, persistent knock. "Open up," a voice said, muffled and barely audible through the glass and the wind. "It's cold." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was a human voice. But what human could be out here, in the middle of a storm, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest settlement? "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm freezing. Let me in." My car broke down. It sounded logical. Another driver. Maybe he had seen my truck and walked here. I reached toward the lock. But something stopped me. Instinct. The same instinct that makes a rabbit freeze in front of a fox. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see through a small clear patch where the frost had melted. I saw a face. Pale. Blue lips. Eyes wide open, staring straight at me. But he wasn't wearing a hat. At -45, in a blizzard, he stood there without a hat. His hair had frozen into icicles. He was wearing a light plaid shirt. No jacket. No gloves. A person dressed like that would die in 3 minutes. Yet he stood there and spoke in a completely calm voice. His teeth weren't even chattering. "Let me in. I need to warm up." "Go away," I shouted, stumbling backward. "Go away or I'll shoot." I didn't have a gun. But he didn't know that. The face outside the window changed. The pleading expression disappeared. In its place appeared anger. Pure, concentrated hatred. He slammed his fist against the glass. The window vibrated. "You have to let me in. This is my place." Then he began scraping his fingernail down the glass. Scrape, scrape. From top to bottom. He didn't blink. I crawled deeper into my sleeping bag and covered my ears. I could hear him walking around the truck. He pulled on the door handles. He climbed onto the hood. At one point I saw his upside-down face staring through the windshield from above. It went on for hours. He didn't leave. He whispered. He begged. He threatened. He screamed. He cried in a child's voice. Then he growled. Toward morning the storm stopped as suddenly as it had begun. And the sound stopped. I didn't leave the cab until I saw the bright orange lights of a road grader clearing the highway. It was a rescue crew. When I climbed out, my legs nearly gave out. The grader driver ran over to me. "Man, you're lucky," he said. "We thought the storm buried you for good." I grabbed his jacket. "Where is he? Where's that man?" "What man?" the driver asked, confused. "You're alone out here. The nearest settlement is 200 kilometers away." I pulled him toward the truck. "Here. The footprints." He walked around the truck all night. We looked at the snow around the vehicle. The snow was perfectly smooth. A clean, untouched surface after the storm. Not a single footprint. Not human. Not animal. "You had a dream, brother. Oxygen deprivation. Stress," the driver said, patting my shoulder. I almost believed him. Almost. Until he started attaching the tow cable. I decided to wipe the window from the outside. I stepped onto the side step. On the driver's door window, on the thin layer of ice, there were scratches. Deep grooves. Made by fingernails. And on the roof of the cab, where the wind hadn't blown the snow away, there was a print. A footprint. A bare human footprint. I quit a month later. I sold the truck. Now I work in a warehouse during the day. But sometimes, when it snows and the building becomes quiet, I feel like I hear that sound again. A fingernail scraping across glass. And I ask myself one question. If I had opened that door that night, what would have come inside? And you? If you saw a freezing man in the middle of a storm, would you open the door? I heard a sound. At first it was quiet, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Metal against metal. I was lying on the sleeper bunk with the curtains drawn, trying not to breathe. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just the wind. Or maybe the engine cooling down. But then the cab shifted. Just barely. Someone had stepped onto the side step. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the tire iron I always kept under my pillow. My fingers closed around the cold metal. I waited for them to pull the door handle. But they didn't. Instead, I saw the rubber seal on the driver's window slowly begin to press inward. Someone was feeding a thin wire into the cab. That's when I made a mistake. I looked through the small gap between the curtains. Outside the glass, in the dim glow of the parking lot lamp, there was a face. It was pressed so tightly against the window that the nose was flattened and the skin had turned pale. The eyes were wide open, but they weren't looking into the cab. They were looking directly at the gap in the curtains. Straight into my eyes. And the man smiled. These are 3 true scary stories about night hauls. I've been a long-haul truck driver for 12 years. I've seen accidents that freeze the blood in your veins, drunk drivers weaving across highways, and strange lights hanging in the sky above the Nevada desert. But the thing that made me install 3 extra locks on my cab door happened on an ordinary route through Washington state. It was November. The rainy season had turned the highways into long gray ribbons of shining asphalt. I was hauling a load of lumber south to Oregon, a standard run I'd done hundreds of times. I knew every pothole. Every roadside diner. Every dead zone where the cell signal vanished. Around 2 in the morning I realized I was falling behind schedule. Up ahead was a construction zone that could delay me for another hour. So I made a decision. I cut across using the old Highway 101. It was a narrow 2-lane road winding through dense forest. During the day it's beautiful. At night it's just a tunnel of trees carved out by your headlights. The first 40 minutes were quiet. Just the sound of rain and the steady growl of the diesel engine. I sipped cold coffee and listened to a late-night radio talk show. Then I saw it. Something glinted on the roadside about 200 meters ahead. As I got closer, my headlights caught a red sedan. It was sitting half in the ditch. The trunk was open. The hazard lights weren't flashing. A familiar sight on a night like that. Someone probably lost control on wet leaves. I slowed down. Professional courtesy says you check if someone needs help. But something stopped me. There were no skid marks on the asphalt. And the car sat too neatly in the ditch, as if someone had carefully placed it there. I drove past, watching it in the rearview mirror. The interior of the sedan was dark. No one inside. Fine, I thought. The driver probably caught a ride. I picked up speed again. The radio started to hiss as I drove into a low valley. 10 minutes later the road bent sharply, and my headlights swept across the trees. My heart skipped a beat. On the roadside sat the same red sedan. Same open trunk. Same angle in the ditch. My brain immediately searched for a rational explanation. Maybe it was just a similar car. There are thousands of red sedans. Just a coincidence. I forced myself to believe that, even though the cold knot in my stomach said otherwise. I didn't stop. Instead I pressed the accelerator, pushing the 18-wheeler to the fastest safe speed for that road. 5 more minutes passed. The forest grew denser. Branches hung low over the road, creating a suffocating tunnel. And then I saw it again. The red sedan. But this time it wasn't on the shoulder. It was parked sideways across my lane. I slammed on the brakes. The heavy truck skidded across the wet asphalt. The trailer began to swing. I fought the steering wheel as adrenaline flooded my system. The truck finally stopped about 20 meters from the car. Silence. Just the ticking of the windshield wipers and my own heavy breathing. The engine idled quietly. The sedan was empty. Both doors were wide open. I reached for the radio to call the police, but the speaker produced nothing but static. I was in a dead zone. I switched on my high beams and the roof-mounted floodlights. The forest exploded into unnatural brightness. That's when I noticed the detail I had missed before. The red sedan wasn't broken. It had no engine. The hood was slightly open, and beneath it was nothing but empty space. It was a shell. A prop. Someone had dragged it here. But why? The answer came a second later. A rock flew out of the forest to the left of my cab and smashed my driver's side mirror. I flinched. Another impact followed, this time against the windshield. The glass spiderwebbed but held. I looked left into the darkness of the woods. People were standing there. Not one. Not two. At least a dozen. They stood perfectly still, just staring at the truck. Dressed in dark clothing. I couldn't see their faces, only pale shapes. They didn't shout. They didn't wave. They just stood there and watched. Then one of them stepped forward onto the asphalt. He was holding something long in his hand. A metal pipe or a crowbar. The others followed. They moved slowly, almost in sync, spreading out around the cab. That's when I realized I couldn't reverse. The trailer had jackknifed when I braked, and it would take time to straighten it. I couldn't go forward either. The car shell was blocking the road. I was trapped. The man with the crowbar approached my door. He didn't try to open it. He simply struck the metal step with the bar. The sound rang out, sharp and loud. A signal. The others rushed the truck. I heard someone climbing the ladder on the passenger side. Others scrambled onto the coupling between the tractor and the trailer, trying to disconnect the brake air lines. If they cut those hoses, the brakes would lock solid. I'd never move again. The panic turned into cold anger. I shifted into gear. "Hang on, you bastards," I whispered. Then I hit the gas. The truck roared and lurched forward. My bumper slammed into the red sedan. Without an engine it was light, it skidded sideways with a terrible grinding noise, clearing the road. But I couldn't accelerate. Someone was still hanging from the passenger side mirror, smashing the window with something heavy. So I began jerking the wheel, throwing the truck from side to side. I heard shouting. I didn't stop. The man on the mirror finally lost his grip. A dull thump echoed beneath the trailer wheels, but I didn't let myself think about what it might have been. I drove another 10 miles through that cursed forest without slowing down until I reached a brightly lit highway. Only when I saw the lights of a gas station did I allow myself to stop. I climbed out of the cab on shaking legs. The side of the truck was scratched. The mirrors were shattered. But the worst thing was waiting behind me. On the rear doors of the trailer, in the dust and grime, someone had drawn a huge cross with a finger. And underneath it were the words, "Almost." Police searched that stretch of road the next morning. They found no red sedan. No people. Only tire tracks and broken glass. One officer suggested it might have been local teenagers or a car theft gang. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a robbery. They never tried to open the cargo trailer. They were trying to get to me. And the way they stood in the forest, silent and motionless, that wasn't how criminals behave. Since that night, I never leave the federal highways. And if I see a car on the roadside in the middle of the night, I don't slow down. I keep my eyes on the road ahead. The second story happened about 6 months later, in the empty desert regions of Utah. Have you ever wondered why truck drivers talk so much nonsense over the CB radio? Weather, food, diesel prices, anything at all. It's not because we're bored. It's a way to make sure reality still exists. To make sure that somewhere out there in the darkness, another human being is alive. That night, the airwaves were silent. I was hauling frozen goods to Salt Lake City. Interstate 15 is long, straight, and unbelievably dark out there. There was no moon. My entire world had shrunk to the pool of light in front of my hood and the dim glow of the dashboard. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed headlights in my mirror. Someone was driving behind me. That's normal. A lot of cars tuck in behind a semi to save fuel in the slipstream, or simply to feel safer with a big truck leading the way. But this driver behaved strangely. He was following too close. So close that I couldn't see his headlights in my side mirrors. Only a faint glow somewhere behind the trailer. I lightly tapped the brakes to flash my brake lights, a polite request to increase the distance. The glow disappeared. He turned off his headlights. Now I was driving through total darkness, knowing that 2 meters behind my bumper a 2-ton piece of metal was flying down the highway at 110 kilometers per hour. Idiot, I muttered. I switched on my rear fog lights. Nothing. Empty road. Maybe he had turned off somewhere. I checked the mirrors again. The highway behind me was pitch black. I relaxed, took a sip of my energy drink, and kept driving. 5 minutes later, the CB radio crackled to life. Breaker 19, a voice said. It was distorted, low, and filled with heavy static. Hey, driver of the blue Volvo. Your rear door is open. A cold wave ran through me. Blue Volvo, that was me. If the refrigerator trailer door was open, the cargo would thaw. Or worse, it could spill onto the highway. Thanks, partner, I replied, grabbing the microphone. Where are you? I don't see you. I'm right behind you. In your blind spot. The voice sounded too calm. Too steady. I checked my mirrors again. Still nothing. No headlights. Turn your lights on, buddy. I'm going to pull over, I said. Don't stop, the voice replied. Now it sounded harder. If you stop, everything will fall out. Just slow down. I'll push the door shut with my bumper. That was nonsense. No sane driver would suggest closing a trailer door with a bumper while both vehicles were moving. That's suicide. Who is this? I asked, feeling the hair rise on the back of my neck. No answer. But then I felt a slight jolt. The truck lurched forward. Someone had actually tapped my bumper. No headlights. Total darkness. I pressed the accelerator, trying to pull away. The jolt came again, harder this time. Someone was trying to push me off the road. Or make me lose control. What the hell are you doing? I shouted into the radio. Your door is open. The voice changed. It became high-pitched, almost childish. And it was laughing. Your door is open, let us out. This wasn't another driver. The voice wasn't coming from a different radio. The interference sounded wrong, strange, not electrical. I glanced at the trailer tire pressure monitor. Everything normal. Door sensor, closed. The green light glowed steadily. The doors were closed. The impacts from behind became rhythmic. Bam. 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 I realized that if I stopped out here, in the desert, no one would come to help. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. My truck isn't a race car, but it's heavy. I stopped trying to escape the impacts and instead began swerving the trailer, using the entire width of the lane so the vehicle behind me couldn't pull alongside. Suddenly, headlights behind me exploded into life. It wasn't a car. In the rearview mirror, flashing under harsh strobes of light, I saw an old rusted pickup truck. But there was no one clearly visible behind the wheel. The cab was stuffed with junk, rags, boxes, mannequins. The pickup suddenly swung left into the oncoming lane and pulled alongside me. I looked down through the passenger window. The pickup's window was open. Something sat in the driver's seat. It was wrapped in dirty bandages. Only the eyes were visible. And it was holding a CB microphone where its mouth should have been. The pickup kept pace with me perfectly. Centimeter for centimeter. The bandaged figure slowly turned its head and looked straight at me. The whisper came through the radio. Clear. Without static. As if the speaker were sitting inside my cab. You're not watching the road. I snapped my eyes forward. Right in front of my truck, maybe 50 meters away, a massive moose stood across the highway. I jerked the wheel to the right. The truck tilted violently. Tires screamed. Somehow I managed to keep it from rolling as the rig shot onto the gravel shoulder. Dust exploded into the air, blinding me. I fought the wheel for another 100 meters before the truck finally came to a stop. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. I grabbed the tire iron and jumped out of the cab, expecting an attack. Silence. Desert. Stars. No moose. No pickup truck. I walked around the truck. The rear bumper was dented. The paint was scraped off, the metal bent inward. Rust marks from another vehicle were smeared across it. But that wasn't the worst part. I checked the rear doors of the trailer. They were locked. The security seal was intact. But the dust on the doors had been wiped away. As if someone had been dragging their hands across them. Dozens of small handprints. On the outside. I drove to the nearest town without letting go of the CB microphone, even though it never made another sound. I quit that company a week later. Not because of the pickup. Because when I delivered the cargo, the warehouse receiver asked me something strange. "Hey, why are there scratches on the inside of your freezer doors?" I looked. The inside aluminum panels of the doors were deeply scratched. As if someone had been trying to claw their way out. But the seal had never been broken. And I had hauled that load alone. To this day, I still don't know what was outside with me on the road, the pickup with the bandaged driver. And I'm even more afraid to think about what might have been riding inside the trailer with me. The third story happened just a month ago. And it scares me more than anything else, because there were no chases in it, no phantom trucks. There was only me, and silence. I was hauling a load of auto parts out of Detroit. A brutal snowstorm had rolled in. Visibility was practically zero. I was so tired my eyes had started watering. Continuing to drive was dangerous. Then I saw a sign for a rest area and pulled off the highway. It was an old parking lot, far from the main road. No facilities except a crude outhouse and a couple of trash bins. The lamps didn't work. I was the only one there. I shut off the engine, leaving only the auxiliary heater running. The silence fell instantly. Snow sealed the windows, creating a quiet white cocoon around the cab. I checked the doors, locked. Pulled the curtains shut. Crawled into my sleeping bag. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. I dreamed that I was driving through an endless tunnel. I woke up because of a sound. Crunch. 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 Footsteps in fresh snow. Someone was walking around the truck. I looked at the clock. 3:15. I lay still and listened. The footsteps stopped beside the driver's door. I waited for a knock or the sound of someone trying the handle. But nothing happened. The person just stood there. Then the footsteps started again. Whoever it was walked along the side of the truck toward the trailer. I heard someone fiddling with the lock on the fuel tank. Siphoning diesel, I thought. Anger overpowered fear. It happens all the time. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, the kind that could crack a skull, quietly climbed into the driver's seat and prepared myself. My plan was simple: flip on the headlights, hit the horn, and jump out. Usually thieves panic and run. My hand rested on the light switch. And then I noticed something strange in the side mirror. The snowfall had slowed, and the moon was faintly lighting the parking lot. Footprints. There was a trail of footprints in the snow around my truck. But something about them was wrong. The person had approached the truck from the forest. He had walked around the cab. But the footprints didn't lead away. The trail ended directly beneath my driver's window. As if the person had walked up, and then vanished. Or jumped. Cold sweat ran down my back. I looked down through the small lower window in the door at the metal step below the cab. There were boots standing on it. Dirty, heavy work boots. The man was standing on the step of my truck. Right now. He had been there the whole time while I thought he was by the fuel tank. He had been standing there, pressed against the door, just below the level of the window so I wouldn't see him. Why? Why stand on the step in freezing weather without trying to open the door, without making a sound? I slowly removed my hand from the light switch. If I turned on the lights or started the engine, he would know I wasn't asleep. Suddenly the door handle slowly moved downward. Very slowly. He was checking if it was locked. The lock clicked but held. The handle returned to its original position. Silence. Then I heard a quiet, wet sound. Like someone dragging their tongue across glass. I froze. I sat in the driver's seat, separated from him by a thin sheet of metal and a pane of glass. I could hear him breathing. It was raspy. Uneven. Then he began humming softly. No words. Just a melody. A low, quiet murmur. It felt like it lasted forever. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. I sat there gripping the flashlight, afraid to move. My legs went numb. Suddenly he jumped down. Crunch of snow. Footsteps moving away. Fast. Almost running. Toward the forest. I waited another 5 minutes. Then I started the engine, turned on every floodlight the truck had, and tore out of that parking lot so fast the trailer fishtailed behind me. I shot back onto the highway without even caring about the road. I drove until sunrise without stopping. Not even for the bathroom. When the sun finally came up, I pulled into a large, crowded gas station. I got out to inspect the truck. On the driver's window, on the outside, there was a mark. A greasy, cloudy imprint of a face. Forehead. Nose. Lips. But the worst thing was on the door. On the metal, where a thin layer of frost and grime had settled, someone had written a message with their finger. Not a threat. Not a curse. It said, "I watched you sleep." And underneath, in smaller letters, "Don't forget to check under your bunk." Something inside me dropped. Under the bunk? In the cab there's a storage compartment beneath the lower bed. You can access it from outside through a small hatch, or from inside by lifting the mattress. I always lock the external hatches. With shaking hands I climbed back into the cab and lifted the mattress. The compartment was empty. My tools. The jack. A box of oil. Everything was in place. But in the corner, among the rags, there was something that shouldn't have been there. A photograph. An old square Polaroid. In the photo was me. Sleeping. It had been taken from above, from the angle of the driver's seat. The photo had been taken that night. The hatch outside had been opened so carefully I never noticed. He had crawled inside while I slept. He had been lying beneath me, under the thin plywood of the bunk, listening to my breathing. Then he climbed into the cab, took the picture, left through the door. I remembered the lock being open in the morning, but I had blamed my own forgetfulness, closed it again, and then stood on the step to scare me one more time. He could have killed me at any moment. But he chose to just watch. Since then, I don't sleep in the truck anymore. I only stop at motels. And every night, before turning off the lights, I check under the bed. Because I know something. The roads are long. And he's still out there somewhere. And he has my photograph. If you ever see a lonely truck parked at a rest stop at night, don't walk up to it. You don't know who is sleeping inside. Or who might be hiding underneath it. And if you're a driver, are you sure you locked every door? Are you sure you're alone in the cab? Check now. Good night.